Making sense of the overwhelming wave of information means cutting through the noise to shine a light on the heart of the story and making room for new perspectives. True understanding means the ability to see events from more than one side. I'm Liu Xin, and this is The Point. After 4 difficult and often tense years, there is hope of a reset in China-U.S. relations with the election of Joe Biden. Writing in the New York Times this week, Ying, vice chairwoman of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the 13th National People's Congress of China, suggested a future for both countries based on co-opetition or competitive cooperation, in which competition becomes creative, not divisive. So what does the U.S. and China need to do to reset relations? What would co-opetition look like? And could closer non-governmental ties help both countries talk to each other, not past each other? To explore these points, I'm pleased to be joined in Beijing by ZHAO, research fellow at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and from Philadelphia, BLACKBURN-DWYER, president of consultancy agency Grasshopper Strategies. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So, on Wednesday, Chinese President Xi Jinping congratulated Joe Biden, saying he hoped both sides would focus on cooperation, manage differences, advance the healthy and stable development of China-U.S. ties, and join hands with the international community. Despite criticism that China has taken extraordinarily long to congratulate Joe Biden, it seems that China finally has picked up the phone and used this opportunity to express the wish that they want to reset relations. ZHAO, how do these terms sound to you? Have China's expectations for this relationship changed after 4 years?
No, I don't think China's expectations of U.S.-China relations has changed since the transition from the Trump administration to the Biden administration, because over the past 4 years, and I think looking forward for the next 4 years, China's wish has remained the same, having a good, stable relationship with the United States. And in that telegram to President-elect Biden, President Xi has particularly emphasized that China wants a healthy and stable relationship with the United States. This is very important because he put in the word healthy, which has 2 meanings. On the one hand, we want to improve the relationship, make it more healthy for both countries, both peoples. On the other hand, now we're under the attack of the pandemic, the COVID-19, so we want both people to be healthy.
So it's a pun. Good for that footnote. Otherwise, I didn't think about it that way. Brandon, did you think about it that way? And by the way, how in sync was the U.S. expectations for this relationship?
I saw the statement as a return to the type of rhetoric used before President Trump was elected. In that, I mean, it was pretty standard fare. I think that most notably, from a globalist perspective, it was a reference of the international community, international cooperation. That might not have been at the forefront 5 or even 10 years ago in a statement about China and the United States. But what we saw is President Xi Jinping, I think, extending that olive branch. Because while the wish of China may not have changed much in the last 4 years, as my colleague says, and I don't know if I agree with that. Where I would say there's a huge change is that the last 4 years have seen China and the United States engage in harsh rhetoric about each other. Sometimes for good purposes, sometimes for not good purposes, sometimes because they were distracted by the story of the day. But that harsh rhetoric and that confrontational nature brought about in large part by President Trump has become one of the defining features of the relationship. And this statement by President Xi Jinping is sort of a, hey, why don't we get back to the relationship we had more normally with the United States, where we might have disagreements, but we still talk about cooperation, we still talk about opportunities, and then we share our concerns in constructive, less confrontational tones.
Well, definitely, at least the message is out there. In her article, I think China is using different channels to send the voices over, to send the messages over. For instance, in her article in the New York Times this week, Madam Ying wrote that competition between both sides is inevitable, but managed competition could be an advantage. She called this approach co-opetition. But ZHAO, what would co-opetition or cooperative competition look like in practice? What do you think of this term?
Well, my understanding is that many competitions could be healthy and could be cooperative. For instance, in terms of education or health, when two countries compete for the level of higher education or the length of people's lives, that could be in a sort of competition when you show each other the numbers. However, both countries can cooperate on education exchanges and also on improving people's livelihood by solving the problem of infectious disease or chronic disease. In that respect, China and the United States has been working together quite well. So I think on the one hand, people and countries and companies can compete, but on the other hand, cooperation make that compete more healthy.
Well, in an ideal situation, that should be the case, but competition also means competing interests, and sometimes people are just not so happy to lose. Brandon, how easy is it going to be to balance between competition and cooperation? What about egos? Can people really compartmentalize?
It's very difficult. Cooperation and competition can be contrary concepts. I believe that good, healthy, sportsmanlike competition can create incredible creativity and creative opportunities. Research, evolution, capitalist economics is based on competition being healthy for the broader community. But competition can also be Darwinian. It can also create a situation where one side loses sight of the larger community and says, well, I really need to focus on what only benefits me. Fu Ying's article was interesting in that it kind of, again, harkened back to 2015 language, laying out very clearly what used to define the relationships. China's red lines, economic cooperation, potential for global cooperation on environment, concerns about some other areas, but it also was a major evolution. One, it was in the New York Times. That is a major evolution for a Chinese influential figure to be posting an op-ed in the New York Times to try to explain an official statement to try to explain the viewpoint to an international community. That's a huge step forward. And one of the lines in the piece actually talked about encouraging Chinese leadership to start providing more first-hand information to the world, to start explaining China's interests. So I think that that's a step in the right direction, and it's a pretty significant call for change internally as well.
Let's take a look at that sentence, actually. That's really a very interesting sentence. Fu Ying wrote that China has not always been as transparent as it could have been, saying China also needs to be more proactive in providing the rest of the world first-hand information about what the country stands for and why it is doing what it is doing. ZHAO, what do you think she's trying to convey? What do you think she's trying to do? And if you know what she means, could you give an example or what specifically China could do in order to be more transparent?
Well, I'm not quite sure exactly what she meant there, but however, I think it's quite clear in other part of her article, she refers to, for instance, the Belt and Road Initiative. And she said very clearly that the Belt and Road Initiative, from Chinese perspective, is providing public goods to the world. And that's exactly China's intention. However, from the American side, look at it and thinking this is China's strategy to dominate the world. So I think probably from that perspective, China needs to explain more to the United States and to the world that what exactly China intends to do with the Belt and Road Initiative. And on other parts, I think rhetoric matters because sometimes China wants to express the idea that China now is rising, standing up, and becoming part of the a big country that supports the international system and international order. However, sometimes the expression that heard from Western ears is like China is trying to replace the U.S. or trying to dominate the world, making this a really distorted idea or this kind of misrepresentation of China's true intentions. One example that President Xi used to say that the Pacific is big enough for both countries, United States and China. China's idea is that China welcomes the U.S. as a Pacific power. However, some in the U.S., from what I heard, they think that China wanted to divide the Pacific with the U.S. So sometimes we need to make our intentions clearer to make it more transparent for the other side to understand.
It seems that sometimes language or cultural differences or the difference in way of thinking seem to also come in the way. Brandon, what's your take on this?
I would go a bit farther in sort of saying that, yes, language, culture, a lot of these different issues, also a history of how engaged with the global media. China's learned a lot in the last 20 years, and I think Fu Ying is at the forefront of that by engaging the New York Times. But what we need to look beyond that is saying that historically, I think the last 10 years, China has heard this, you need to explain yourself. And they hear it very much like a parent talking to a child saying, you need to explain yourself. And it's not that. What it is leadership is about laying out goals, laying out justifications, laying out this is what I think and this is how I believe, rather than sort of taking action and assuming the rest of the world's going to understand what's going on. There's been, I think, too much of China making certain actions and just assuming everyone's going to understand what it is, and then getting upset when other people have a different interpretation. To go a bit further on a specific detail, look at the two references to the military. Fu Ying specifically calls on the U.S. military and the Chinese military to create more high-level, consistent communications. This has been a major effort over the last 30 years to improve military-to-military communication, something that's really been sidetracked in the last few years. Yeah. She references it also acknowledging that a growing Chinese Navy may create friction. Even that acknowledgement is a huge step forward to creating an open dialogue that can hopefully create long-lasting peace.
Finally, as I promised, let's take a look at some comments from netizens following my Twitter account. For instance, this one, a viewer by the name of Mike at WSJ Mackenzie says, if the system is universal, then there will be one controller, which the whole world doesn't want, and one system cannot work in all communities in the world. Even in families, we have different problems with different solutions. No teacher likes similar answers from students. And then another viewer, Koti Hanu, said, as someone who is currently doing research on China-U.S. relations, it is definitely possible, meaning co-opetition. There's been more cooperation with China and the U.S. in the past than people think. Competition in specific areas will be great for the world. Both systems are good. 30 seconds to you, ZHAO, then 30 seconds to Brandon.
Well, I agree. I think from the cultural and institutional perspective, yes, this world is has so much diversity, and countries and peoples should recognize there are other cultures and there are other institutions. We should peacefully coexist. However, on the other hand, I think in the era of globalization, we also need a more standardized sort of code of conduct and rules and regulations in this world. Otherwise, commercial competitions and all kinds of innovations and business activities cannot work on the same platform. So I think U.S. and China can work on something like level playing field for one thing, and then on the other hand, I think for value systems and cultures and institutions, we should respect each other's different political systems.
Brandon?
We can't allow diversity to distract us from actual, real disagreements. We need to find ways to be able to accept different points of views, accept different approaches, and find constructive solutions to them while actually handling where we disagree.
Okay, thank you so much, ZHAO and Brandon Blackburn-Dwyer. With that, we come to the end of this edition of The Point with me, Liu Xin. As always, follow me on Twitter using the handle, and Facebook using the handle, Liu Xin in Beijing. Thanks for watching. It's great to be back. I'll see you tomorrow at the same time.